Hi folks, and welcome to the lesson on film form and cinema and experience. I want to draw your attention to a writer named Maxim Gorky, who is a Russian poet who happened to be at one of the first exhibitions of the Lumiere films. And he wrote a 2-page document explaining his experience of films. And he begins by saying, "I saw Lumiere's cinematograph, moving photography. The extraordinary impression it creates is so unique and complex that I doubt my ability to describe it with all its nuances." I want us to lock our attention onto this phrase, "I doubt my ability to describe it with all its nuances." And embedded in that phrase, I think, is a useful way of introducing us to what film form is. I'm going to show you another film that Maxim Gorky and the first film spectators saw that day. And this one is generally called Baby's Breakfast. Think about how you would describe this film. The first thing I'd ask you to do is to describe it the way that a Netflix synopsis tends to describe its content. A one-sentence plot summary. That is, the easiest way to describe what's going on in a film. What you might say is that we have two adults, perhaps a mother and a father, are feeding their child, a baby, presumably a breakfast or a lunch. Not much is going on in that sentence because this is a 1-minute film. It barely entails a narrative. It is a slice of life and everyday scenario. What we're not getting a lot of is detail when I ask you to describe this in terms of a summary. But if we took on Gorky's suggestion that there's a lot to be described in early films, I might ask you, what can you describe beyond that summary? Then you might start to notice details. You might notice, for instance, the fact that at a certain moment in the film, the baby has his biscuit or cracker in his hand, almost takes a bite, and then gestures out towards someone next to or beyond the camera. This could be, say, a moment in which the baby is actually gesturing toward the people who are beyond the frame, perhaps the cameraman, perhaps Lumiere's brother who might be operating the camera or standing nearby. In any case, it's a moment that's worthy of note because it's breaking seemingly the fiction that we have a ordinary event, a breakfast, captured on camera. It's something that can't be, say, summarized in the phrase, "a father and mother feed their child." It's an element of the form of the thing. Now, if I shared a little bit of history with you, there was an aspect of form of this film that spectators famously grappled onto. And it wasn't the father, the mother, or the child. In fact, spectators fixated on the wind in the trees in the background. Another element of form that couldn't possibly be accounted for in the simple description of the plot or story or scenario of this film. But many people think that there is something about the wild, chaotic, unpredictable nature of the movement of the trees that seem to be interesting, given that the history of the image thinks of the image as something that is planned by a creator. And if a moving image is like a painting or a photograph and is the result of decisions of an artist, wouldn't it be interesting if there were an image that gave us things that we couldn't possibly control? This is one theory as to why audiences fixated on it. All of these things constitute something that is beyond the simple content, the depiction that this film gives us. So we might say, putting this in kind of this or that terms, what we have is a mother and father attempt to feed their child versus the wind in the trees. Or in the most famous of the early Lumiere films, a train arrives at the station, or in Gorky's terms, it seems as though the train will plunge into the darkness in which you sit. The second thing is not entailed by the first. So what we have here are three ordinary ways of depicting what is on screen, but they're not capturing how things are depicted. And that distinction between what and how is what I want to call content versus form. What is the content? That is, what is depicted refers to the content of a film. How it's depicted refers to form. And this class pays special attention to the how. That's going to be drilled in every single week. And to put it in more technical terms, what is form? Well, form really is just the spatial and temporal arrangement of an artwork. In fact, we can even take form further than that and say that it's the spatial and temporal arrangement of any material thing. It's the how of how things are put together, visually and spatially. Films are designed to create experiences for viewers, Bordwell and Thompson, the authors of our textbook, will say. The idea that everything is designed in a particular way. And then they say something like this: at each instant, the filmmaker can't avoid making creative decisions about how viewers will respond. Every movie maker is also a movie viewer, and the choices are considered from the standpoint of the end user. Filmmakers constantly ask themselves, if I do this as opposed to that, how will viewers react? This is one trick that I want you to use all throughout the course. Anytime you're getting stuck and you're not sure what to say or what to think in order to say, get beyond the surface, or rather say, get into something analytical about a film as opposed to that which is merely obvious about a film, ask yourself, what is the effect of the filmmaker choosing to do things this way as opposed to that way? We have a train arriving at a station. What was the effect of putting the camera here as opposed to there? Now, as a bit of an exercise, why don't we look at a very, very simple sequence in terms of content that is actually rather complex in terms of form. I'm going to show you three sequences. Each of them can be described roughly with the same content. They're from the horror film The Shining by Stanley Kubrick from 1980. And I could describe them as simply a child rides his tricycle or his big wheel through the empty halls of a hotel. Okay. Now, once again, I'll play it silently. Once again, we have this image of a child riding his big wheel through the empty halls of a hotel. But I want to say that this is creepy. I'm not sure if it's creepy. It's just a hypothesis I have. Some of you may agree, some of you may not. But the important point, if I believe that it's creepy and I want to convey its creepiness to my reader, if I say I'm doing film analysis, what I have to do is not merely say it's creepy and assume that it's obvious, that you understand that it's creepy too. My job is in fact to elaborate the formal details of this clip that lend itself to that creepiness. And then I might start to do the work of formal analysis simply by finding those details that could produce the creepiness. I might, for example, consider that the camera is low to the ground, following Danny, the name of the child in the film, at an angle that emphasizes his smallness, his point of view. And what does that do? When you emphasize the smallness of Danny, you simultaneously emphasize the largeness of the hotel. And when you emphasize the largeness of the hotel, you also emphasize the emptiness of a hotel. So that we have the fact of the placement of the camera conveying a sense of danger, that the child is alone in a very open, vast space. An open, vast space, a hotel, that we generally don't occupy when it is empty. A hotel is generally a populated space. This lends itself to the creepiness. What about another fact of the placement of the camera? The fact that we don't see Danny's face. Danny is presumably playing here, but we don't actually see his facial features, smiling or giggling. In fact, we don't hear him giggle with delight at all. We just have to presume that he's doing this to enjoy himself, but really there is no evidence to suggest that he's doing this with a sense of childlike play, but rather maybe he's doing this in a creepy sense of deliberate and repetitive ritual, which is emphasized also by the fact that he seems to be going in circles. What else could we say about this? Some of you may have noticed the sound. There's no music here, so we can't say the music makes it creepy, but I'm sure some of you noticed this. The difference between the sound of the carpet and the sound of the hardwood floor. Now, of course, I would have to say there's nothing inherently creepy about hearing the difference between the silence of the carpet and the echoey hardwood making a sound when he rides over it. However, I imagine that a lot of you noticed it as something worth thinking about and something that enhanced your feeling of this particular sequence. And maybe that's because when you hear the difference between hardwood and carpet, you're also being alerted to the fact that you're hearing a very small detail, and thus realizing that this is an utterly empty and silent space, right? That, in other words, this is not literally silent, but it feels silent because of the particular sounds that we hear. Silence as an aesthetic is not just the lack of sound, it's the heightening of certain sounds that convey that we're in an atmosphere that's largely empty, right? That's a choice. We don't have to go to Kubrick and say, did you intend to do it that way? But it's there in the film. And I can make a claim that it produces a creepiness if I make a certain claim to its logic. And we also might start to think about another element of creepiness. That element has to do with the fact that the camera doesn't evenly follow Danny. And in fact, unevenly follows Danny. It goes close, and then it goes far. Now, what does that do? It seems like a rather banal, almost meaningless detail to bring up. But in fact, a lot of people, when they watch this, find this significant, but they're not quite sure how. One way we can say that it's significant in a horror film is that it almost gives us the impression that the camera isn't merely, say, a viewpoint upon Danny, but it almost has a sense of agency. Like it's a being. It's not, of course, an actual ghost, but it almost has a ghostly presence, given that there seems to be some kind of choice involved in going close to Danny and then retreating from him. So, form isn't just about these details, it's also about the differences that are established over a pattern. And this film has a pattern in which Danny rides his big wheel through the empty halls of the hotel 3 times. So I might ask you to do a bit of more formal analysis by asking, what is different about the second iteration of his riding his big wheel through the halls of the hotel? Let's watch the third version. So the reason I showed you both clips is because I'm going to ask you, or give you the opportunity, to do a little bit of formal analysis yourself on these two clips. Think about them as forming a pattern with respect to the first clip, and ask yourself, what are the formal differences? What are the significant differences that are small but matter to the choices that the film is making in order to create a sense or impression of creepiness? And what I want to remind you of is Bordwell and Thompson's claim, right? That as a viewer or listener, you don't simply let the parts parade past you. You enter into an active participation with them, creating and readjusting expectations as the pattern develops over time. So when you watch a film like The Shining, or any film in which patterns start to emerge, you, whether you realize it or not, start to form expectations, and then you are kind of given reasons to pay attention to the alteration of those expectations, just like we've seen in these three brief clips. So once again, just to summarize, why are we doing this? Well, we're trying to summarize the difference between content and form. If I told you the content of these three shots, or at least the first two, I might say merely a boy rides his tricycle through a hotel. Not too exciting. But the form is everything that we've discussed. So what this course is doing is it's breaking down in the, say, first half of the film, of the class, aspects of form in film. And each of these terms looks at an aspect of how form makes up a cinematic image. The first is a term called mise en scène. Think of that as the arrangement of things in front of the camera, both decor, in terms of sets and props, and actors, and what's known as blocking, or how you arrange an actor in real time. Cinematography is the composition of the frame, the color composition of the image, the lenses that are chosen. Editing is the piecing together of shots in time. Sound entails the arrangement of oral elements like musical score, sound effects, the treatment of voices. Narrative is how the story is told. It's the arrangement of events in time. Notice that I've emphasized the way in which the importance of the creepiness in the Shining clips had little to do with plot. However, there is a way to think about plot in terms of form. Why this event preceding that event? What happens when this event in Act 1 echoes that event in Act 5? Anytime you have an arrangement, that's form. And notice the way in which I've tried to emphasize the kinds of words that convey arranging, designing, putting things into place in a particular way. Mise en scène is the arrangement of things. Cinematography is the composition of the frame, the way it's composed. Editing is the piecing together of shots in time. Sound is the arrangement of oral elements. Narrative is how the story is told or arranged. So what we're going to do the next time is look at how some of these things might be going on in our feature film Rear Window.